May 2nd, 1945. Berlin is a sea of rubble and Red Army soldiers. Deep beneath the Reich Chancellery Garden, the Führerbunker is silent, a concrete tomb reeking of smoke, sweat, and schnapps. The men who guarded Adolf Hitler, the SS Begleitkommando, are gone, scattered into the chaos of the city's final collapse. But 3 questions remain. Where did they run? What happened to the men who were the last to see the dictator alive? And how do you disappear when your face was once inches from the center of absolute power? The SS Begleitkommando des Führers, or Escort Command of the Führer, was formed in 1932. It was an 8-man team, expanded during the war, chosen for absolute loyalty. These were not soldiers in the conventional sense. They were the human shield. The constant shadows who lived and worked alongside Hitler in every headquarters, on every trip, and in his final moments. They saw everything and spoke to no one. They were the last line of defense for a regime that had already fallen, and when the end came, they walked out of the bunker and into history, each with a different fate. The final commander of the unit was SS Obersturmbannführer Franz Schädler, a trained toolmaker from Baden-Württemberg. He had been a member of the bodyguard detail since its inception, a constant presence for 13 years. He took command of the unit in December 1944. In the bunker, he was responsible for the dwindling roster of about 30 guards who still manned the posts around the Chancellery complex. On April the 28th, 1945, during the intense shelling that preceded the final Soviet assault, Schädel was walking through the Chancellery garden when a shell fragment from a Soviet 152mm howitzer tore into his lower leg. The wound was severe, causing a fracture that refused to heal in the damp, unsanitary conditions of the bunker. Dr. Werner Hasse, one of Hitler's physicians, treated the wound, but Schädel was effectively crippled. He was forced to hobble through the final 72 hours of the Third Reich on a pair of makeshift crutches. On the evening of May 1st, as the 10 breakout groups began to assemble, it was clear to everyone, including Schädel himself, that he could not make the arduous journey through miles of rubble and enemy lines. He gave his remaining subordinates their final orders: join a breakout group and try to reach the west. He had a brief final conversation with his adjutant, Oberscharführer Klaus Wagner. He did not join the exodus. Instead, Franz Schädler, the last commander of Hitler's personal guard, placed his pistol to his own temple and pulled the trigger. His body was one of dozens found by the Soviets in the Chancellery days later. His fate, a footnote to the main event. Not everyone chose death. Rochus Misch was the bunker's telephone operator and bodyguard, a member of the Begleitkommando since 1940. Originally a painter, he was wounded in Poland in 1939 and subsequently reassigned to Hitler's staff. In the bunker, he manned the switchboard R, a small alcove near Hitler's study, connecting the Führer to a collapsing world. He put through the final, desperate calls to generals like Wilhelm Keitel and Alfred Jodl. He listened as Hitler dictated his last will and political testament to his secretary, Traudeljunge. He saw Magda Goebbels, dressed in black, come to the switchboard on the afternoon of May 1st to make a final call, then saw her return to her children's quarters with cyanide ampules. He was one of the first to re-enter the room after Hitler and Eva Braun committed suicide. On the morning of May 2nd, around 4 o'clock, with the Soviets now inside the Reich Chancellery itself, Misch received a call from the chief mechanic, Johannes Henschel. The bunker's last defenders were to surrender or flee. Misch packed a small bag with letters from his wife, grabbed a few bottles of wine, and walked out of the bunker, one of the last 3 men to leave. He tried to navigate the U-Bahn tunnels, but found them flooded and blocked. He emerged near the Stettener Bahnhof and was immediately captured by 2 Red Army soldiers. The journey into the underworld had begun. For the next 9 years, Rochus Misch was a ghost in the Soviet prison system. He was taken to the infamous Lubyanka prison in Moscow, a 7-story neoclassical building with a horrifying reputation. He was interrogated for months by agents of the NKVD. They refused to believe his story. They presented him with photographs of a supposed Hitler double and demanded to know where the real Führer had gone. He was inmate number 27 in a special section for high-value German prisoners, held alongside Heinz Linge and Hans Bauer. After months in Moscow, he was sentenced to 25 years of hard labor and sent to a series of gulag camps. He spent years in the Karaganda camp system in Kazakhstan, a vast network of mines and construction projects fueled by prisoner labor where temperatures could drop to minus 40 degrees Celsius. He survived malnutrition, disease, and the brutality of the guards. If you value documented WW2 and post-war history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Now back to the story. In 1954, following Chancellor Konrad Adenauer's 1953 visit to Moscow to negotiate the release of the last German prisoners of war, Rochus Misch was finally freed. He returned to a divided Berlin, to the district of Rudau in the American sector. He secured a loan and bought a small business, living for the next 50 years as a painter and decorator. For decades, he was just another old man in a quiet suburb, his past known only to his family. He died in Berlin on September 5th, 2013, at the age of 96. Another shadow who survived was Heinz Linge, Hitler's personal valet since 1935. A former bricklayer from Bremen, Linge oversaw Hitler's daily routine, waking him, selecting his clothes, delivering messages, and serving his meals. He was one of the few who had daily, unfiltered access. On April 30th, or 1945, after lunch, Hitler met with Linge and Otto Günsche and gave them his final instructions for the disposal of his and Eva Braun's bodies. Linge was one of only two men who stood outside the study door. When the shot rang out at approximately 15:30, Linge waited 10 minutes, then entered the room with Martin Bormann. He saw Hitler slumped on the sofa, a Walther PPK pistol on the floor. He saw a teacup-sized bloodstain on the carpet. Linge wrapped Hitler's body in a gray army blanket and, with the help of 3 other SS guards, carried the 60-kilogram corpse up the 4 flights of concrete stairs to the Chancellery Garden exit. The Soviet artillery was so intense they had to wait for a lull before they could place the body in a shallow depression. He watched as petrol was poured over the remains. He gave one final Nazi salute and went back down into the earth. Linge joined the breakout attempt on the night of May 1st, as part of a group of several hundred led by SS Brigade Führer Wilhelm Mohnke. Their objective was to cross the Weidendammer Bridge and fight their way northwest to link up with a German army group under General Felix Steiner. The plan was a fantasy. Steiner's army had been annihilated days earlier. The crossing was a death trap. Soviet heavy machine guns and anti-tank cannons swept the bridge. Dozens were killed or wounded in the first few minutes. Linge was captured near the Charité Hospital on May 2nd. Like Misch, he was flown to Moscow. The Soviets knew exactly who he was. For 10 years, he was a prisoner of the MVD, held in solitary confinement at Lubyanka and in Vladimir Central Prison. He was a central figure in Operation Myth, a secret dossier Stalin ordered to confirm the details of Hitler's death. Linge and Günsche were housed together and forced to write and rewrite their accounts, their memories mined for every detail. The result was a 413-page report, bound in a single copy and presented to Stalin in December 1949. He was sentenced to 25 years. He was finally released on September 22, 1955. He returned to West Germany and got a job working as a clerk for the Delfter House Company in Hamburg, which built prefabricated houses. He died in Hamburg on March 9, 1980, at the age of 66. The other man who stood outside that door was SS Sturmbannführer Otto Günsche. He was Hitler's personal adjutant. Born in Jena, he had joined the Leibstandarte at 17 and was selected for the bodyguard unit in 1936. A towering figure at 6 feet 6 inches, he was a constant presence at Hitler's side during military briefings. It was Günsche to whom Hitler gave his final, explicit order: ensure his body was burned completely. Günsche stood guard over the burning pyre for nearly 3 hours, from around 1600 to 1830, Heinz, ordering other SS men to bring more canisters of petrol to keep the fire going. He joined the same breakout group as Linge and Mohnke. After the failed bridge crossing, his smaller group managed to get through the Soviet lines and hide in the attic of a bombed-out building on Schönhauser Allee. On May 2nd, the building was surrounded, and he was captured. He too was flown to Moscow, a prize captive for Smersh. He spent the next 11 years in Soviet prisons and labor camps. His interrogations were even more intense than Linge's. As a military adjutant, the Soviets believed he held key operational secrets. Like Linge, he was a primary source for Operation Myth, his photographic memory providing crucial details on the bunker's layout and personnel. He was held in Moscow, then transferred to a special camp for senior German officers in Vladimir. The Soviets, and later the East Germans, tried to turn him, to make him a propaganda tool for the new German Democratic Republic. He refused every offer. After his release from Soviet captivity in May 1956, he was handed over to the East German authorities and held for 2 more years in Bautzen prison. He finally made it to the West in 1958. He settled near Cologne and, using connections from former comrades, became a manager for the pharmaceutical company Reineg. He almost never spoke of his past. When the British historian David Irving tracked him down in the 1970s, Günsche refused to cooperate at length, stating that he wished to be left alone with his nightmares. He passed away from a heart attack on October 2nd, 2003 at the age of 86. The man who supplied the fuel for the cremation was Erich Kempke, Hitler's primary chauffeur since 1934. On April 30th, 1945, in Omosken, he received Günsche's frantic order: find 200 liters of petrol. In a city where a single liter was worth more than gold, Kempka and his men scrambled to the chancellery garages. They found 5 or 6 wrecked vehicles and used hand pumps to siphon fuel. But they could only gather 180 liters. He personally delivered the 10 canisters to the garden exit of the bunker. He stood and watched the flames. Kempka also joined a breakout group on the night of May 1st. He made it across the Weidendammer Bridge but was hit by shrapnel and temporarily blinded. He was separated from his group and stumbled through the ruins of Berlin for days, linking up with a 17-year-old Hitler Youth girl who guided him. Unlike the others, his flight took him west. A journey of over 300 miles on foot and by hiding in refugee transports. On June 20th, 1945, he was captured by American soldiers from the 101st Airborne Division near Berchtesgaden. Because he was in Western hands, his story became public much sooner. He was interrogated by the Americans and the British, and his testimony was a key piece of evidence at the Nuremberg trials. His signed affidavit, dated September 19, 1945, was used to formally establish Hitler's death, countering Soviet propaganda that he had escaped. He was held in various internment camps until October 9, 1947. Upon his release, he lived a relatively quiet life in Bavaria, working for a time as a mechanic. He died in Freiburg am Neckar on January 24, 1975. The fate of the pilots was different again. Hans Bauer had been Hitler's personal pilot since 1932. In the bunker, he devised a desperate escape plan. He told Hitler a Fiesler-Storch reconnaissance plane was waiting at the Brandenburg Gate, capable of taking off from the cratered east-west axis road. Hitler refused. The war will be won or lost in Berlin, he told Bauer. On May 1st, Bauer joined the breakout with Martin Bormann. They were hit by a Soviet tank shell near the Weidendammer Bridge. Bauer was severely wounded. He was captured and his ordeal began. His wounds became infected with gangrene. At a prisoner of war hospital in Poznan, his right leg was amputated below the knee with a pocket knife and no anesthetic. He was taken to Moscow and interrogated, as the Soviets remained convinced for years that he had flown Hitler to safety. He was subjected to torture, but he had no information to give. He spent 10 years in Soviet prisons, including 9 months in solitary confinement in Moscow. He was released on October 10th, 1955 tour, as part of the same agreement that freed Linge and Misch. He returned to West Germany and wrote his autobiography, I Was Hitler's Pilot. He died in Herrsching, Bavaria, on February 17, 1993. These men were the inner circle. But survival was often a matter of pure chance. Bruno Gesche was the unit's longtime commander, an alter Kämpfer, or old fighter, from the earliest days of the Nazi Party. He was a favorite of Hitler's, despite his chronic alcoholism. In December 1944, during a drunken argument with another officer, Gesche drew his pistol. This was the final straw. He was demoted and sent to the notorious SS penal unit Dirlewanger on the Eastern Front. He was captured by the Americans in 1945 and spent 2 years in a POW camp. His alcoholism saved his life. Had he not been dismissed, he would have faced the end in Berlin. Fritz Dargis, an SS adjutant, was also dismissed by a twist of fate. On July 18, 1944, during a strategy meeting at the Wolf's Lair in East Prussia, a fly began buzzing around the map table. Hitler repeatedly ordered Dargis to deal with it. Dargis, distracted, suggested that as it was an airborne pest, it was a matter for the Luftwaffe adjutant. Hitler flew into a rage and dismissed him on the spot. Dargis was sent to the Eastern Front with the 5th SS Panzer Division Wicking. He was captured by the Soviets and released in 1949. He went on to work for the car manufacturer Opel. A moment of insubordination over an insect meant he lived to be 96. After the war, the Führerbunker was sealed by Soviet forces. They attempted to demolish it in 1947 using 2 separate explosive charges, but the heavily reinforced concrete structure barely moved. The surface-level chancellery buildings were raised between 1949 and 1950. The red marble used to build the Soviet War Memorial in Treptower Park. The bunker itself was left beneath the death strip of the Berlin Wall, a forgotten void. In the late 1980s, the East German government excavated the site during a housing project and filled the structure with concrete and sand. German reunification in 1990 brought a construction boom to the area. For years, the only marker was an anonymous car park. Finally, in 2006, a small information board was erected on the corner of Inden-Ministergarten and Gertrud Kolmarstrasse. It shows a diagram of the bunker layout and a few paragraphs of text. Thousands walk past it every day. The bodies of Hitler, the Goebbels family, and General Hans Krebs were repeatedly buried and exhumed by Smersh at various locations in East Germany. The final burial site was a Smersh facility in Magdeburg. In 1970, with the facility about to be handed over to the East German government, KGB director Yuri Andropov ordered the remains destroyed to prevent the grave from ever becoming a shrine. On April 4th, 1970, a Soviet team exhumed 5 wooden boxes, cremated the contents, and scattered the ashes into the Biederitz River. The men who guarded the bunker became ghosts, their stories scattered like ash. Rochus Misch, living his quiet life in West Berlin, once visited the site. He looked at the unremarkable patch of ground, the apartment blocks, the children playing nearby. He said only, and it was a coffin of concrete.